Some truths wait a lifetime to be told. Others wait until after death. Sarah held a yellowed envelope in her hands, found between the pages of an old book. Her name was written in the shaky handwriting of someone who no longer had strength, but still had much to say. Her father's handwriting. That letter shouldn't have been there. Not like this. Not 6 months after the funeral. She remembered the last embrace, the smell of cheap cigarettes mixed with hospital disinfectant. The words he didn't say, stuck in his thin chest. "I love you, sweetheart," was all. Simple, short, incomplete. Sarah always knew there was something more. Something trapped in his throat. Something that weighed in his tired eyes every time he looked at her. But she never asked. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of respect. Maybe because some doors, when closed, should stay that way. Now, alone in the empty house that still smelled like him, Sarah unfolded the paper. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat erratically. She didn't know if she wanted to read it. Didn't know if she was ready to discover what a man keeps for an entire lifetime, and only reveals when he can no longer face the consequences. The dead don't lie, but they also don't explain. They don't console. They don't ask for forgiveness face to face. The first line was devastating. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer there to tell you in person. Forgive me for that. Forgive me for everything." Forgive what? What does a father need to ask forgiveness for from beyond the grave? Sarah took a deep breath. The room was too silent. The clock on the wall marked each second with cruelty. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Like a countdown to an emotional explosion she didn't know if she was ready to face. She kept reading. Slowly. Each word was a stone in her stomach. Each sentence, a revelation. That man she'd known her whole life. That silent, hard-working father. That man she thought she understood. Was a stranger. A stranger with secrets too big to fit in one body. Secrets that shaped every decision, every distant look, every "I love you." That always sounded a little too sad. Sarah realized in that moment that knowing someone isn't the same as understanding them, and that sometimes the deepest love is the one that never managed to be completely honest. The letter had 3 pages. 3 pages that would change everything she thought about her family, her past, and who she really was. 3 pages that would answer questions she didn't even know she should ask. And as she turned to the second page, Sarah understood. Some truths aren't for the living. They're for those who remain. For those who need to learn to forgive what they never had a chance to question. Sarah was 32 years old and had a life that looked perfect on paper. Her own apartment, stable job as a literature teacher, attentive fiancé planning a wedding for next summer. But perfectly organized doesn't mean perfectly happy. And Sarah carried a restlessness she never knew how to name. A feeling that something essential was missing, as if her life were a puzzle with a lost piece at the bottom of an old box. She grew up as the only daughter of a widowed father. Her mother died in childbirth. That was the weight Sarah carried since she was old enough to understand the meaning of those words. She killed her mother by being born. Of course, nobody said that. Nobody would dare. But it was there, unspoken, floating in every look from her father when he thought she wasn't watching. An old sadness, a pain that never fully healed. Sarah learned early to be grateful, not to ask for much, not to be a problem. Her father, Daniel, worked his whole life as a mechanic. Hands always dirty with grease, smell of diesel oil stuck to his clothes. He didn't talk much, didn't show affection easily, but he was always there. At school presentations, at graduations, at birthdays, present but distant, as if there were invisible glass between them. Sarah grew up loving a man she never really managed to reach. A man who raised her alone, but who always seemed to be carrying a burden greater than the simple responsibility of being a father. She tried for years to fill the void. Read every book she could find. Dove into other people's stories because hers seemed incomplete. Became a teacher because teaching literature was the only way she found to make sense of the world. Each character she studied, each plot she unraveled, was an attempt to understand her own father, to decipher that silent man who made coffee every morning, but rarely sat down to drink it with her. Her fiancé, Marcus, said she thought too much. Your dad loved you, Sarah. That's what matters. But love without understanding is only half the story. And Sarah always knew there was another half. A hidden part, locked away, buried somewhere Daniel never let anyone access. She saw it in the moments when he looked at old photographs and quickly put them away when he noticed she was nearby. Saw it on his birthdays, when he pretended to be happy, but had the eyes of someone who'd rather forget he was getting old. Now, holding that letter, Sarah understood she'd lived 32 years knowing only the surface of who her father was. And that hurt. Hurt because she loved him. Hurt because he was gone. Hurt because some answers arrived too late to change anything, but too early to be ignored. The letter promised truths. But truth, Sarah was learning, is a double-edged sword. It cuts both the lie and whoever holds it. The second page began with a confession that paralyzed Sarah. Your mother didn't die in childbirth, Sarah. She's alive. She's always been alive. 6 words. 6 words that destroyed 32 years of history. 6 words that turned every memory into a lie. Sarah dropped the letter, stood up, sat down again. The floor seemed to move under her feet. The room spun. The air was too heavy to breathe. She read it again and again, as if repetition could change the meaning of the words, but it didn't. It was there, written in her father's shaky handwriting. Her mother was alive. All the weight Sarah had carried her whole life, all the silent guilt of having killed her mother at birth, all the pain that shaped who she was a lie. A carefully constructed lie, maintained for decades, sustained until his last breath. Why? Why would a father do this to a daughter? The letter continued, but the words seemed blurred. Sarah had to wipe her eyes several times to read. Daniel explained that he'd separated from her mother when Sarah was only 3 months old. A bitter divorce, violent, full of accusations and resentments. Her mother, Elena, was too young, too unstable, too lost to be a mother. Or at least that's what Daniel believed at the time. He fought for custody and won. But winning in court wasn't enough. He was afraid. Afraid Elena would come back. Afraid she'd try to take Sarah. Afraid of losing his daughter. So Daniel made a choice. A choice that seemed protective at the time, but would become an emotional prison for a lifetime. He moved to another city, cut all ties, and told Sarah when she was old enough to ask that her mother had died. A white lie, he thought. A way to spare his daughter from rejection, from the pain of knowing she was abandoned. But white lies are still lies. And lies, however well-intentioned, eventually poison everything. Sarah felt nauseous, angry, confused, betrayed. Her father, the man she loved most in the world, had stolen from her the chance to know her own mother, had invented a death, had created a false grief, and worse, had let Sarah grow up feeling guilty for a tragedy that never happened. How many nights did she spend awake, imagining what it would be like if her mother were alive? How many times did she look in the mirror and wonder if it was worth being alive if it meant someone else had to die? The letter tried to justify itself. Daniel wrote about the fear, about protection, about how each passing year made it harder to go back, how he wanted to tell the truth 1,000 times but never found the courage, how he knew he was wrong but didn't know how to fix it without destroying everything. Excuses from a dead man, explanations that arrived too late to be discussed, questioned, forgiven, or properly condemned. Sarah looked at the 3rd page. Her hands trembled so much the paper shook like a leaf in the wind. There was more. Of course there was more. This story couldn't be as simple as an old lie. And on the last line of the 2nd page, before turning to the end, Sarah read, "She tried to find you, Sarah, for years, and I stopped her, in every way possible." The world crumbled a little more, because it wasn't just a lie. It was active sabotage. It was the deliberate destruction of a relationship that could have existed. It was theft. Theft of time, of memories, of love. And there was no way to return what was taken. Sarah couldn't read the 3rd page that night. She threw the letter on the table as if it burned, left the house with no destination. walked the empty city streets while her mind tried to process the impossible. Her entire life was a lie. Every memory, every conversation about her dead mother, every tear shed at a grave that was merely a symbol of something that never existed. She'd visited that cemetery every year on her mother's death anniversary, brought flowers, talked to a headstone, and her father was beside her in silence, sustaining the farce. The phone rang. Marcus. She ignored it. It rang again, and again, until she answered, her voice coming out strange, broken. "Sarah, where are you? It's 2 a.m. She tried to explain, tried to put into words what she'd discovered. But how do you summarize a life based on lies? How do you say my father stole my mother from me without sounding too dramatic? Marcus was silent on the other end. A silence too long. Then, "Come home, babe. We'll talk when you're calmer." Calmer. As if this were a matter of calming down. As if it were just a stressful moment that would pass with tea and a good night's sleep. Sarah hung up, kept walking, arrived at an empty plaza, sat on a cold bench, and finally let the tears fall. They weren't simple tears of sadness. They were tears of anger, of loss, of betrayal so deep it seemed to cut to the bone. She had loved a man who deceived her every day of her life, and now he was dead. Dead without having to face the consequences, without having to look her in the eyes and explain. In the following days, Sarah didn't return to work, called in sick with the flu. Marcus tried to help, but she pushed him away. How could he understand? How could anyone? She stayed locked at home, staring at that letter on the table as if it were a poisonous snake. The 3rd page still waited, but Sarah didn't have the courage. Because if the first 2 pages destroyed her perception of the past, what would the 3rd page do? What other bombs had her father left planted in that yellowed piece of paper? She began to question everything. Every childhood memory now seemed suspect. The trips they always took to distant places. The way her father changed the subject when she asked about relatives. How he refused to take photos or appear on social media. Everything had a reason. Everything was part of an elaborate system to keep Elena away. Daniel wasn't just a protective father. He was an emotional kidnapper. A man who built a prison of lies so convincing that his own daughter never suspected the bars. Sarah picked up her phone, typed Elena, and the last name that was on her birth certificate. The last name she always thought belonged to her dead mother. The internet opened doors. Social media profiles. A woman in her early 50s, dark hair like Sarah's, green eyes like Sarah's, living just 2 hours away. 2 hours. For 32 years, her mother had been just 2 hours away. And Sarah never knew. There were photos, Elena at parties, Elena traveling, Elena smiling, living a complete life without her daughter. Or trying to live. Because Sarah noticed something in that woman's eyes in the photos. A familiar sadness. The same sadness she saw in her father's eyes. The sadness of someone who lost something they should never have lost. Did Elena think of her? Did she remember? Or had she moved on, built a new life, forgotten the daughter she couldn't raise? The letter said she tried to find Sarah. But for how long? When did she give up? And why? Sarah finally read the 3rd page. It was late at night, a week after discovering the first bomb. The page revealed addresses, phone numbers, dates. Daniel had documented everything. Every time Elena tried to make contact, every letter he intercepted, every phone call he blocked. There was a list, a cruel list of frustrated attempts. 18 letters between 1995 and 2003, 12 recorded phone calls, 3 visits to the old house before the final move. Elena didn't give up easily. She fought and lost. But at the end of the letter, Daniel wrote something that made Sarah's heart beat differently. She deserves to know you, Sarah. She deserves to know what an incredible woman you've become. And you deserve to have a mother. I was wrong. I was so wrong there's no possible forgiveness. But maybe you can have something I stole from you. Her address is here. The choice is now yours. It was strange. It was wrong. But it was also a door. A door Sarah thought was closed forever. But that her father, even in death, was opening one last time. Sarah picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard. She typed a message to Elena's profile. Simple, direct. My name is Sarah. Daniel was my father. He passed away 6 months ago. I found a letter. We need to talk. Sent it before courage fled. And waited. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Until the phone vibrated. A response. Sarah? My Sarah? Dear God. Yes. Yes, we can talk. When? Where? Please tell me this is real. They scheduled for the following Saturday. A neutral cafe, public, safe. Sarah told Marcus. He was worried but supportive. Just be careful. You don't know who this woman really is. But Sarah felt she needed to know. Needed to look into her mother's eyes and understand. Understand why she didn't fight harder. Understand who she was beyond her father's lies. Understand if there was room, after 3 decades, for something that could be called a relationship. The days until Saturday passed in slow motion. Sarah oscillated between hope and terror, imagined what it would be like, what they'd say, if there would be a hug or discomfort, if Elena would love her immediately, or if time had created an insurmountable distance. She rehearsed phrases in the mirror. Hi, I'm your daughter. No. Too direct. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Better. More neutral. But nothing seemed right. How do you introduce yourself to someone who should have known you forever but is essentially a stranger? Saturday arrived. Sarah entered the cafe 15 minutes before the scheduled time. Ordered tea she couldn't drink. Her hands sweated. Her heart raced. Every time the door opened, she looked. And then, she entered. Elena, older than in the photos, hair with silver strands, wrinkles around her eyes. But the face was undeniably familiar, like looking into a mirror of the future. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe, and for a second, just 1 second, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Elena crossed the cafe quickly, stopped in front of the table. Her eyes were full of tears. Sarah, she whispered. And then, without asking permission, without hesitating, she hugged. A tight, desperate hug, as if afraid Sarah would disappear. And Sarah, surprisingly, hugged back. There, in the arms of a stranger who was her mother, she felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't healing, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Something that felt dangerously close to a new beginning. They talked for hours that first meeting. Elena cried. Sarah cried. Stories were shared. Elena showed photos of a life Sarah never knew. Talked about the years searching. The private detective she hired with money she didn't have. The unreturned phone calls. The doors slammed in her face. Daniel had been meticulous. Changed his name on some documents. Used fake addresses. Created a fortress of bureaucracy Elena could never penetrate. And when she finally gave up, it wasn't for lack of love. It was from exhaustion. Sarah wanted to believe. Wanted to believe this woman in front of her was as much a victim as she was. That they could build something together. Mother and daughter finally reunited after 3 stolen decades. They began seeing each other regularly. Coffees, lunches, walks in the park. Elena told stories of her youth, of how she met Daniel, of how they were happy for a brief moment before everything fell apart. And Sarah listened, wanting so badly for this to fill the void inside her. But there were cracks, small at first. Elena talked a lot about herself, about her pain, about how she suffered, but rarely asked about Sarah, about who she was now, about her dreams, fears, life. It was as if Elena was more interested in the daughter she lost, in the baby who was stolen from her, than in the 32-year-old woman sitting in front of her. Sarah was more a piece of Elena's trauma than a real person, and that hurt in ways Sarah didn't know how to name. Then came dinner. Elena insisted on introducing Sarah to her current husband. "My family needs to meet you," she said. Sarah accepted, nervous but hopeful. Maybe it was the beginning of something bigger, of belonging somewhere. But when she arrived at Elena's house, reality hit her like a punch in the stomach. There were photos on the wall. Elena with 2 children, teenagers now, children from her current marriage. And Elena introduced them with pride. "These are my kids, Jake and Emma. Not your siblings, not your family, just my kids. Sarah was the visitor, the anomaly, the daughter who existed in another time, in another life. During dinner, Sarah realized something that silently destroyed her. Elena had moved on, had built a complete family, had overcome losing Sarah and created a new happy life without her. And now Sarah was there, a walking reminder of a painful past Elena had packaged and stored away. The attention Elena gave the other children, the way her eyes sparkled when they talked about their lives, compared to the forced, careful way she looked at Sarah, as if walking on eggshells, as if Sarah were too fragile, or maybe too strange. Sarah left early, making up an excuse. In the car, parked on the dark street, she finally understood the cruel truth. She hadn't just lost a mother. She'd lost the illusion that finding this mother would fix something inside her. Elena wasn't a villain, wasn't a hero, was just a woman who'd done the best she could with the cards she was dealt. And those cards didn't include Sarah. Not really. Not the way Sarah needed. She called Marcus. For the first time in weeks, she really wanted to talk to him. "Come get me?" she asked, her voice small. He came. No questions. Just hugged her while she cried in the passenger seat. Cried for the mother who died but never existed. Cried for the living mother who would never truly be hers. Cried for the father who loved her but betrayed her. And cried for herself. For the little girl who grew up feeling incomplete. Because she finally understood. There was no missing piece. She'd always been whole. Just too hurt to realize it, Sarah stopped seeing Elena. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There was no fight or ultimatum. Just a gradual distancing. Messages answered less frequently. Meetings canceled. Until they both understood, without needing to say it, that it wasn't working. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just the reality of two lives that separated too early to be reconnected without scars. And Sarah, finally, was learning to accept that. Not every story has a happy ending. Some just have an ending. She returned to the letter, read it again, and again, trying to understand not just what Daniel did, but why. And for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to see her father as human. Not as a hero, not as a villain, just human. Flawed, scared, making terrible decisions for reasons he believed were right. He loved her. She never doubted that. But misdirected love can cause as much damage as hate, maybe even more, because it comes wrapped in good intentions that make blame difficult. Sarah started therapy. Something she resisted for years but now seemed essential. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Rivera, didn't judge, just listened, and asked questions Sarah had never considered. What did you lose by discovering the truth? Sarah thought. Lost innocence, the simplicity of a clear narrative, lost the version of her father she knew. And what did you gain? Sarah didn't have an immediate answer. But with time, she realized, she gained complexity, gained the chance to understand that people are more than a single decision, even terrible decisions. Marcus was patient, more than Sarah deserved, she thought. He held her hand on bad nights, didn't try to fix things, just stayed. And Sarah began to understand that this was love, not the romantic love of movies, but real love. The kind that stays when everything is messy and complicated and there are no easy solutions. They rescheduled the wedding. Didn't cancel, just postponed. "When you're ready," Marcus said. And Sarah loved him even more for not pushing. She returned to the classroom. Her students noticed something had changed. Sarah was different, more present, more authentic, less perfect. And strangely, it made her a better teacher. When she taught about complex characters, about flawed protagonists, she understood in ways she didn't before. Literature had always been about imperfect humanity, and Sarah finally allowed herself to be imperfectly human too. One afternoon, organizing her father's old things, Sarah found a box. Inside, all the letters Elena had sent. Daniel kept them, didn't destroy them, kept them, as if he knew that one day Sarah would need to see them. There were dozens, handwritten, full of love and desperation and pleas. Elena really had fought, and Daniel really had blocked her, but he'd also kept the evidence. As if, even being incapable of doing the right thing, he wanted to preserve the truth for when the time came. Sarah cried reading those letters. But they were different tears. Not of anger, not of betrayal, of mourning. Mourning for the family that never was, for the time they'd never have, for the versions of themselves they could have been in different realities. But there was also something else, something like peace. Because understanding isn't the same as accepting, but it's the beginning. And Sarah was beginning to forgive, beginning to move on, beginning to build a life that didn't depend on filling voids left by other people, but on creating something new with the broken pieces she had. 6 months after finding the letter, Sarah did something she never imagined she would. Returned to the cemetery, not to the fake grave of the mother who never died, but to the real grave of her father. She'd spent a long time unable to visit him. The anger was too great, the feeling of betrayal too deep. But now, with months of therapy, reflection, trying to understand, she needed to be there, needed to talk to him, even though he could no longer answer, maybe especially because he could no longer answer. She knelt on the cold grass, placed yellow flowers, his favorites, and began to speak, quietly at first, then louder. "You screwed me over, Dad. Screwed me over bad. Lied about something you had no right to lie about. Took from me a choice that was mine." Her voice broke. "But I understand. I don't agree. I'll never agree. But I understand you were afraid, that you made an impossible decision and then didn't know how to take it back, that each passing day made it harder to tell the truth." Sarah wiped away tears. "You weren't a perfect father, but you were my father. Raised me alone. Gave me education, shelter, food, taught me to read, took me to all the school presentations even when you were tired, hugged me when I had nightmares. And I know deep down that everything you did, even the horrible parts, you did because you loved me. In the crooked way you knew how to love, in the scared way, in the wrong way. But you loved." She took a deep breath. The autumn air was cold in her lungs. "I forgive you, Dad. Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was right. But because I deserve peace. Deserve to move forward without carrying this anger. And I deserve to remember you for what we were together, not just for what you hid from me." Sarah touched the headstone. The stone was cold under her fingers. "You were wrong. But I'm wrong too. Everyone is wrong. And if I wait for perfect people to love, I'll die alone." Sarah stayed a few more minutes in silence, then got up, took an envelope from her pocket. Inside, a letter, her response to his letter. Pages written by hand where she put everything. The anger, the pain, the love, the complicated forgiveness. She dug a small hole near the headstone and buried the envelope. It wasn't for anyone to read. It was just a ritual, a closure, a way to return the words he'd left for her. Now both had said what they needed to say. She called Marcus on the way back. "Let's schedule the wedding," she said. "For real this time." He laughed, surprised and happy. "Are you sure?" Sarah looked out the car window. The trees were losing leaves, preparing for winter. But she knew that after winter comes spring. Always comes. "Yes, I'm ready to start my own family, my own story. One I can write the way I want." She also called Elena, not to resume the mother-daughter relationship that never worked, but to make peace in an adult way. "Thank you for trying to find me," Sarah said. "And thank you for receiving me when I showed up. It didn't work out the way I imagined, but I'm at peace with it. I hope you are too." Elena was silent for a moment. Then, with a choked voice, "Me too, Sarah. Take care." And it was enough. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was honest. And honesty, Sarah had learned, is worth more than perfect endings. That night, Sarah put her father's letter in a special box, along with old photos, diplomas, small mementos of a shared life. She wouldn't burn it, wouldn't destroy it. It was part of her story. But she also wouldn't keep reading it repeatedly. martyring herself. It was there, stored, part of the past that informed the present but didn't control it. And when Sarah turned off the bedroom light and lay beside Marcus for the first time in months, she slept without nightmares, without waking in the middle of the night feeling lost. She knew who she was, daughter of a flawed man, daughter of an absent woman, but mainly herself. Sarah, complete, whole, free. A year later, Sarah got married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, only people who really mattered. Marcus at the altar, smiling, close friends, co-workers, and an empty chair in the first row. Sarah placed her father's photo there. Not because he deserved to be there after everything he did, but because she deserved to have peace with her story. His absence was part of her now, and Sarah had learned that honoring someone doesn't mean approving every choice they made. It means recognizing the impact they had, for better or worse. Elena wasn't invited, but Sarah sent a wedding photo afterwards with a simple note. "Thought you'd like to know." Elena responded with sincere congratulations, and it was enough. They weren't mother and daughter in the traditional sense. Maybe they never would be. But there was respect. There was mutual recognition. And sometimes that's all broken relationships can aspire to. Not complete healing, but acceptance that some cracks never fully close, and that's okay. Sarah kept teaching. But now, when her students read about dysfunctional families in classic novels, she had something deeper to share. Imperfect people create imperfect families, she'd say. And imperfect families create people who need to learn to heal themselves. Literature shows us this is universal. It's not weakness, it's humanity. Her students listened differently, because she spoke with the authority of someone who'd lived it, not just read it. Months after the wedding, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news came with joy, but also fear. She held the pregnancy test with trembling hands and thought, "I'm going to be different, I'm going to be honest. I'll make my own mistakes, but not the same ones." And then laughed, because she realized her father probably thought the same thing. That each generation swears to do better and does in some things, but fails in others. Perfection doesn't exist, just different versions of love trying to get it right. When her daughter was born, Sarah had no doubts about the name. Elena, not for the mother who couldn't be a mother, but for possibility. For the idea that even names loaded with pain can be redeemed. That you can take something broken and transform it into something new. Little Elena wouldn't carry the weight of history. She'd be the beginning of a new narrative. One where truth mattered, where love didn't come with lies, where mistakes would be admitted, not buried. Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter and finally understood what her father felt. The overwhelming fear of not being enough, of making the wrong decision, of failing at the only thing that really matters. And she also understood that fear doesn't justify lies, that love without honesty is a gilded cage, that protecting too much is another form of imprisonment. But understanding all this didn't make the path easier, just made it more conscious. Years would pass. Sarah would tell her daughter about the grandfather she never met, would tell the complete story, without embellishment, without hiding the ugly parts. Because secrets, Sarah had learned, are like slow-acting poison. They kill generations, and the only way to break cycles is with truth. Painful truth, complicated truth, but truth. And when her daughter grew up and asked the inevitable question, why did he lie? Sarah would answer with the only honest answer she had, because he was human, and humans, when scared, do terrible things thinking they're protecting who they love. Our mission isn't to repeat them, it's to learn from them. Her father's letter remained stored. Sarah reread it sometimes, usually on anniversaries or difficult moments, not to revive the pain, but to remember. Remember that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, doesn't make everything right. Just frees the forgiver from the weight of carrying anger eternally. And each time she read it, Sarah understood a little more. Didn't justify, but understood. And understanding, even without agreement, is a form of peace. It's acceptance that life isn't binary, that people can love us deeply and still hurt us deeply, that we can forgive without forgetting, that we can move forward without pretending the past didn't happen, and that in the end, the only story we have total control over is the one we decide to write from here on. And Sarah was writing hers, with honesty, with love, with visible scars. Because scars aren't signs of weakness. They're proof you survived. And Sarah didn't just survive, she learned to live.